I remember, and you probably do too if you've been that age, teaching my oldest to ride a bike. Remember what that was like? You're running behind her, in this case, holding that fender. We're in the church parking lot, so nobody's going to get hurt, I don't think. And we're running along, and she's wobbling, and then finally she kind of gets it, and then I let go, and she doesn't know that I let go, and she's doing it. Phew. On her own. She gets to the end where she has to turn to go around the building, and she realizes I'm not there. She goes, Dad, I'm doing it. And I'm yelling out, Britta, you're doing it. And then she turns that corner, and she goes around the building and out of sight, and I break into tears. Why? Why would I break into tears at such a joyous time as that? Well, because, of course, this is just a sign of things to come. Blink your eye, right? And it's graduation. And then those little buggers are out of your hair for the rest of your life. And it hurts. This is the pattern of life. Love and loss. Love and loss. Not only with our children, but with everyone. Our spouses, our friends, our acquaintances, our pets, and the beautiful world that we live in. Love and loss, joy and grief. Today we lit the Advent candle of joy on the same day that we observe Blue Christmas, a time of grief. They seem to be opposite, right? But they are closely connected. So I decided to talk about that connection between them today. It's nothing that you don't already know. I jumped ahead a bit in the Christmas story for our reading, as you probably guessed. After Luke has had the angel Gabriel bring good news to young maiden Mary, and after the excitement of the birth, and then the joyful alleluias that come from the angels to the shepherds and usher them running off to find the baby in a manger. After all of that, they go to the temple and they see the mystic Simeon, and he sees the baby Jesus and declares that God can take him, meaning Simeon. You can take me now, God, because I've seen the light of your salvation of my people Israel and the light for the Gentiles. And all of this, has all of this ringing joy about it. And then he turns to Mary and says, your son will be the falling and rising of many in Israel, and a sword will pierce your soul. Whew. This is the case with all of us, is it not? There is not a person alive who eventually has their soul pierced by the death of a loved one. And our response to that soul piercing is grief. Once our souls are pierced by the sword of death and grief, we feel broken. And what is it that we do with that brokenness? I'm going to suggest 3 things today. First, admit that the grief is there and express it. Secondly, see how grief points to a perfect and beautiful world. And thirdly, allow grief to join us with others to seek that beautiful world. Admit that grief is there. Our culture, as you know, doesn't do grief well. America has prioritized happiness so much that we have it written into our founding document, the pursuit of happiness. Wow. Writer Susan Cain says, we Americans prioritize a cheerful goal orientation. Americans should be tough and optimistic and have the confidence to speak our minds and the interpersonal skills to win friends and influence people. An Amazon search will tell you that Americans have written over 30,000 books on happiness. We really love happiness. And this emphasis on happiness and positivity is helpful in many ways. It motivates us to accomplish things. It grants us confidence to stand up for this idea or against that idea, to fight the good fight, you know. But this kind of Norman Vincent Peale hearty cheer can disguise the reality that all human beings are fragile in the face of death. And that disguise has an effect on how we deal with our emotions. We're taught from a very young age to scorn our own tears and then to censure our sorrow for the rest of our lives. Research shows that 1/3 of us judge ourselves for having negative emotions such as sadness and grief. The researcher writes, "We do this not only to ourselves, but to our children as well. And consequently, we are not prepared when trouble comes our way, which inevitably it will." But Luke shows us another way, with Simeon saying, in the midst of all this joy of this birth, "A sword will pierce your soul." You see, Luke wants Mary to be aware of the coming grief. I mean, Luke's first audience has lived through the grief of thousands of lives lost, trying to defend their city against the empire. Luke wants those first readers to know that this story isn't all angels and alleluias, but it's in touch with their real world and what their actual experience is. And of course, this is how it was for Mary, right? I mean, Jesus, gets lost in the temple at Jerusalem when he's a teenager. Well, he doesn't get lost. They don't know where he is. And they run around for a couple days wondering what happened to Jesus. I think he got it when he got home. And then there's the time that his mother and brothers are trying to get into the house that's so packed with people. Remember that? And Jesus somebody says to him, "Your mothers and brothers are out there and they want to talk to you." And he goes, "Well, hey, these folks here, they're my mothers and brothers, the people who do the will of God." And of course, the whole story ends up with Mary at the foot of a cross. This will all happen to us as well. We will lose all the people that we love. So to admit our grief is to admit the brokenness in life and to express those feelings. Grief makes us feel vulnerable, but we don't have to constantly protect ourselves. We can find friends that we trust and express our grief to them. Secondly, we can discover how grief points to a beautiful world. Because grief is a movement, right? Grief doesn't stay in one place. It starts in joy and it goes to sorrow when the person with whom you experience that joy is lost. The second joy is different because we can move back to joy again, though not quickly. When I taught our eldest to ride a bike, it was a real experience, but it was also a symbol of paradise. Not that I'm saying raising kids is paradise. There's problems, I get it. But I was there doing what dads are supposed to do. And she was doing what kids are supposed to do. She was obeying me and taking my support as long as she needed it. And then when I let go, all was well, It was a glimpse of paradise, that little picture there, of all working out. Behind that little experience is that sense that the whole world should be this way. We long for this, and that is our grief. In our grief, we long for the perfect world. And while grief is, yes, the longing for the relationship, but it is that longing which points to the larger longing that we feel, a longing for a beautiful world, for paradise. Jews and Christians and Muslims long for the Garden of Eden, a symbol of paradise pictured in Genesis. Jesus renames that the kingdom of God. And Martin Luther King renames that the beloved community. This is the perfection, the beauty that is at the root of our grief and our longing. Other religions have other names for it. That grief longs for the beautiful world that we glimpsed in that relationship. And of course, it wasn't always there. I'm not saying that. It wasn't always beautiful. Nothing is always beautiful, but it was love. And love is the source of joy. Do you catch yourself sometimes tearing up at a glorious sunrise or a baby's smile, a piece of music? I can't get through a Sunday, without music just taking me to that place. That beautiful place. See, it is as if these things came from paradise. It is as if they came from this beautiful place that we want to belong to, and the tears are our longing for it. The whole Christian story is a response to the grief of the death of Jesus, beginning with the disciples who had lived with Jesus through that remarkable time of healing and compassion and celebration. When the poor got good news, when the hungry got fed, when the lame started dancing and the sick were healed. It was the longing, the grief for those days and the joy that was therein that propelled a bunch of fisher folk and tax collectors into starting the church. That community of people who would share their grief and celebrate their joy. Grief points to a beautiful world. And lastly, grief joins us to others to create that beautiful world. Though grief can make us feel intensely alone, which of course it can, there is a point, sometimes sooner, sometimes later, when we begin to recognize that we are not alone. I remember being in a pastoral care class in seminary, and one of the students made a presentation about his mother dying 10 years earlier and the grief that his family went through. His eyes were wet through most of his talk, and he apologized at the end for getting emotional. The professor said, "Oh, no need for that. There's not a person here who doesn't carry grief." But the presenter didn't respond and looked like he didn't believe what the professor had said. So the professor said, "Well, look, how many of you here in our class have lost a significant person in your life?" And one by one, every hand went up, except for one fellow. The professor turned to him and asked, "No one? Aunt or uncle or grandma or grandpa or neighbor or friend?" "No," the fellow said. "No, I really don't carry any grief with me." "Oh," the professor said, you are fortunate. But the time will come, right?" And at that moment, from the back of the room, someone said, "What about a pet?" And you could see the young man just straighten up. And he crossed his arms and he crossed his legs. And a tear formed at the corner of his eye and it ran down his face. He couldn't say anything. And slowly, he just raised his hand. The fellow behind him then reached out and put a hand on his shoulder, said, "Yeah, we know." You see, grief can turn us toward one another to discover that we all long for a perfect and beautiful world. That is what the expressing of that emotion tells us. Peter Decter, who is the director of the animated movie Inside Out, which is all about feelings if you haven't seen it, he writes, and I quote, "The real reason for emotions, all emotions, is to connect us. And sadness is the ultimate bonding agent." Our grief calls us together to make our world a more perfect and beautiful place. Everyone is grieving. If we can admit it and express it to one another, then we can join together with each other to make our world a more beautiful place. I've seen the musical Les Miserables 3 times. Any of you here seen it? So we have several of you have seen it. Well, it's a musical that is full of grief. A group of freedom fighters have lost the battle at the barricades. Many of them have been killed. Almost every major character in the show has died or been killed or is on the run. And in the last number of the whole show, the entire cast, dead and alive, are on stage. And they are singing a reprise of the song, "Do You Hear the People Sing?" It's full of longing and hope and even joy. Do you hear the people sing? Lost in the valley of the night, lost in grief. It is the music of a people who are climbing to the light, the beautiful world, paradise. For the wretched of the earth, there is a flame that never dies. Even the darkest night will end, and the sun will rise. I'm going to jump to the end of the song now. And at the end of the song, with that whole cast still on stage, they begin marching towards you in that theatrical way that you're not sure why they aren't just coming off the stage and over you. But there they are, marching and singing. And then when they get to this last verse, a red flag goes up toward the rear of the crowd, and it is waved back and forth. And the entire company sings, "Will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me? Somewhere beyond the barricade, is there a world you long to see, you grieve for, that you hope will come into being? Is there a world you long to see? Do you hear the people sing? Do you hear the distant drums? It is the future that we bring when tomorrow comes." Oh, the joy of love in a relationship. Oh, the pain of having lost a loved one and the ache for that love. Oh, the joy of the vision for a perfect and beautiful world and the longing for it. So let us weep for the loss of our loved ones, my friend, for the sword has pierced our soul. Let us weep for the loss of love and justice, but let us not weep alone. Let us join arm in arm with others who are also grieving, and together find the beauty and perfection in the world. Will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me? Somewhere behind the barricade, is there a world you long to see? Do you hear the people sing? Do you hear the distant drums? It is the future that we bring when tomorrow comes. This, you see, is Advent, wrapped up in one thing. It is the future that we bring at God's behest and presence when tomorrow comes. That is what these candles are about. That is what we're waiting for. Geez, I just want you all to stand up and march toward me and sing the song, if you have a chance to see it. You won't regret it.